Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Orbit Live event series, How to Write Your First SFF Novel. Tonight's event is on building your crew, team, band, fellowship, or what have you. I'm Angela Mann. I'm a publicist at Orbit, and I have the pleasure of working with these lovely authors. As a reminder, tonight's event will be recorded, and it'll be available at the same link after the event is over. The events will also be uploaded to the Orbit Books YouTube channel. And you can see past events and sign up for future sessions at the link that's underneath the video that says sign up for more sessions. And we will begin the event by having a discussion on the authors' teams and their books, and at the end, we'll have a audience Q&A. You can enter questions for the authors at the Q&A portion icon that's on the right-hand side. We may not get time to get to all the questions, but we'll get to as many as we can. And to begin, let me introduce all the authors. Alex White is the author of a number of science fiction novels, including the Salvagers series, which began with A Big Ship at the Edge of the Universe, and the Star Metal Symphony series, which began with August Kitko and the Mechas from Space. Leslye Penelope is the author of The Monsters We Defy and the upcoming Daughter of the Merciful Deep, which releases in June of 2024 from Red Hook. Justin Lee Anderson is the author of The Lost War and the sequel The Bitter Crown, which releases in December this year. And Tara Sim is the author of the Scavengers Star duology, as well as the Dark Gods series, which began with The City of Dusk and its sequel, The Midnight Kingdom. To start off the discussion, let's first have everyone tell us about the team in your book or series. Who are the characters, and describe them in terms of their role of the group, like the mentor, the jokester, etc. Is there one main character, or is it truly an ensemble? Alex, let's start with you.
Well, there we go. Got it all unmuted. Yeah, well, obviously from the Salvagers, it's very much a two main character equation where the POV flip-flops between the two of them. I did the exact same thing for the Star Metal Symphony, so if you liked that particular format, then there you go. And that gave me a chance to have two characters to reflect upon everybody else inside of the group and sort of round out. I oftentimes look at team composition in terms of who will reflect the best against the main character. And so if you look at members of my teams, they're not really chosen by like Dungeons and Dragons specialty. I don't go like, oh, we need a healer now. It's much more like, oh, this character represents a path that this other character didn't take, or this character has a bond with the main character that's really important. And so while they are very much ensemble pieces in that you have to give every single character an arc, you have to flesh out every single one of the team, it really always, for me, focuses around one or two main characters.
Whoever wants to jump in next. Tara, why don't you go? Oh, you're muted.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, my physical microphone was unmuted, so I just started. I didn't know there was another secret microphone to unmute. I was saying a little bit. Unlike Alex, I kind of do go with the D&D thing of like, this is what each person can bring in terms of like their magic, but then also in terms of like who these characters are, I try to fill in personality-wise what the others lack so that they can either be a good foil or a good accompaniment to the other characters. So in the City of Dusk, it is quite an ensemble. I have many POVs. And as a result, I like to say that I have 4 main characters, because even though some of them will take priority depending on which book in the series it is. I feel like all four of them are quintessentially a main character. And they are basically all heirs that come from royal families descended from the gods. And so they each bring a unique magic system, but they also bring a unique upbringing in like who their family is and how their family thinks about their power and their relationship to the throne. So you've got these four main characters who kind of grew up together and have this weird love-hate relationship with each other. So you get to see a lot of like backstory with them, but at the same time, along with the reader, you're finding out different things about them. So I really liked this kind of the system of like having these characters who've known each other all their lives still figuring out new things about them. And yeah, that's my ensemble.
Justin, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I took it one step further, and I actually based 7 of my main characters on characters that friends and I had actually role-played previously. So they started as archetypes, so that we've got a mage, a ranger, a paladin, a monk, a soldier, a pirate, and one that turned out to be a blacksmith. And that was the basis of the characters. But we had played these characters for like, I don't know, 5, 6, maybe even 10 years. I can't remember. But then when we finished with them, I didn't want to let them go. And so I built a whole new world for them and developed their characters into people who had a lot more depth and backstory to them than just, the role play characters that they started as. So I took that kind of basic template and then built each one of them to decide who they were and what their background was and what their, psychological damage was and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, mine literally started as roleplay characters and then developed into being something much more than that when I decided to write them into the book.
Leslye, tell us about your crew.
So The Monsters We Defy is a heist story, and so heists need a crew, and it's told basically from one person's perspective. So we do have a main character, but when you meet each member of the heist crew as she is gathering them, like the whole gathering the team scenario, I do sort of interlude. So you get their backstory, even though they're not POV characters for most of the novel. And so the main character is the mastermind, I guess you'd say. She's a psychic. The book takes place in 1925 in Washington, D.C. And the characters have powers. So Clara was born psychic, but she also has this power that's given to her by a spirit. And then there's Aristotle, who can change his face. He's an actor, but his power is to be able to basically shift into any person he wants. You've got sort of the face person, who's like the musician who can hypnotize people with music. And then another character can manipulate memories. And then there's one non-magical character who grew up in the circus, and so she has lots of circus skills. So she's a pickpocket, and she, climbs down from the roof, and she's sort of an aerialist. And I did think about like the kind of skills that they would need to pull off the heist, and kind of in this genre, what you're used to seeing, and thought about it that way, and tried to balance not just the skills that they would need for the heist, but also the powers that they were given by these spirits, and which also have a good side and a bad side. And so having that interesting mix, so that there was a lot to play with in terms of how the plot rolls out and the ways that I could increase conflict and also solve conflict as well.
So how do all your characters come together during the events of the novel or your series? Are they already working together before the book starts? And why did you choose that timing? Leslye, since you're already talking about your band, let's start with you this time.
So for my 5-person crew, two of them were roommates, so they knew each other ahead of time. And then I wanted to have the experience of her having to bring on new people. And then one of the major conflicts is the actual love interest of the story, who she brings on, and they have conflicting goals. So I did a mix of people who knew each other ahead of time, and then meeting people and organizing the crew together, so that there's these new energies present and people who have different agendas and different goals and different ways of doing things, so that we can mix it up. but also still have this kind of cool found family.
Whoever wants to go next.
I feel like I already kind of answered this question, but there is a secret fifth person on this team of mine in City of Dusk, who is not part of the families, and I wanted him specifically because he is, like, a commoner and not part of this like big insular group, and so getting him, trying to figure out how he fit into everything was really fun, because you have this kind of like outsider to this group who literally grew up together, and then as soon as he comes in, he's like, "You all are insane, and I hate every single one of you." So it was fun to, especially over the course of book two, to kind of figure out how this kind of outsider character becomes part of this core group of five POVs of and how they get to work together and or not work together and or weird romantic fallouts therein.
Justin, we have some Lost War love in the comments, so why don't you go next?
Ooh, loving the Dylan. Thanks, Dylan. Cool, I hadn't seen that. Yeah, so it's slightly complicated why I did what I did, and I'm going to just skate over that because it's kind of a spoiler. But the book begins in the immediate aftermath of a pretty devastating war in the country, and so the way I pulled them together is Aronok, the mage character, and Alandria, who is his bodyguard and the sort of ranger character, she's his bodyguard, but they're also lovers. And they kind of interfere to rescue the blacksmith character, Vastin, who's 15-year-old, from tax collectors. And they then are called by the king to meet up with two of the other characters, Nyria and Glorbad, who are the pirate and the soldier character, as he's forming a new king's council in the wake of the end of the war, which brings them together. And then the other two main characters are my monk and my paladin, who are, God, I've forgotten one character's name, Meristan and Samali. And they are on their way to join the council as well. But get waylaid on the way, and they happen to meet up at a point which would be a spoiler to tell you as well, so I'm not going to do that either.
And Alex, tell us about how your characters came together.
Sure. Well, in A Big Ship at the Edge of the Universe, the first book of the Salvager series, the characters come together because one of them is a con artist who sells fake treasure maps, who accidentally happened to be right this one time, and has sort of awakened the wrath of a dark cult. And then the other one just happened to be a witness to the dark cult murdering somebody. So they ended up meeting each other pretty quickly. In my most recent publication with y'all, August Kitko and the Mechas from Space, August Kitko and Ardent Violet are lovers before the story starts. And it's a whirlwind romance where they sort of start out, the world's going to end. What else are you going to do? And then the world doesn't end, and they sort of have to learn to care about each other after having started out as lovers. And it's an interesting inversion of that romance.
Next, we're going to talk about what your character building process was like for the team. Did you come up with one character at a time, or did you know starting out that you would need a certain number or people to fill a role? I think some of you have answered parts of these questions in your other answers, but if you have anything to add to that, Alex, why don't you go first this time?
Well, yeah, insofar as I said that I didn't use the D&D method, I am going to have to eat some of those words, because if you're operating a starship, there are certain jobs you want to have people in, and like I feel like pilot, that kind of stuff. And so I did try and say, like, what would a small starship's crew complement be? And I did a little research on what other answers people had come up with, and so I did definitely start the biography there. But almost nobody who's on the crew sort of had that as their dream job. It's not like, oh, I always wanted to be a pilot. Nobody felt that way about that particular ship. So,
whoever would like to go next.
I will say that I started out knowing there were archetypal characters. So aside from the heist roles of, someone has to pick the lock or whatever, because it's 1925 and I'm dealing in sort of our world, like alternate history, I wanted certain types of characters. So I wanted someone who had been a World War I veteran. I wanted a Pullman porter. I wanted a jazz musician. So I kind of started, I had made a list of all the interesting sort of Black cultural archetypes that I could think of from that time period. And I didn't get all of them, but I did get, a significant amount. And then it was like, okay, who could fill those roles? Could they fill multiple roles? And how would these people interact together? How would they, feel about each other? Is there any sort of inherent conflict among them that I could play off of too? So there were things like that that I just, once I was doing the research for this particular story, that I wanted to have as part of it.
I feel like mine kind of goes hand in hand with my world building. Because when I first got the initial premise for the City of Dusk, many years ago, I initially thought, like, the initial premise was just there are multiple noble houses descended from one line of kings. They will have to fight over that. And it wasn't until much later that I realized that there were going to be multiple realms in this universe that corresponded with different magic systems, and each of them were going to be corresponding to that realm and that realm's god. Um, so it's kind of like, okay, well, if there are four realms, that must mean that there are four families. And so therefore, this family has shadow magic, this one has necromancy, this one has elemental stuff, this one has light magic, and kind of seeing how those magic systems kind of acted against or with each other. And as I'm still figuring out as I draft book 3.
Justin, you mentioned that your characters came from a role-playing game, but did you use all the characters in the game, or did you change, like adapt them to your story?
Very much, and tying in with what Tara said, the world building really affected that. So once I had the world that they were gonna be in, what I then wanted to do was go back and sort of, what I started with was characters who were sort of fully formed. This is where they began, but I wanted to go back and see, well, what was their life like to get them to here? So in this world that I've created for them, what has been their life experience previously, and what would that mean for them? What have they been through? What are they dealing with? What has been their experience? So, for example, I don't know what my main character is. In my world, they're called Dries, but he's basically a mage. He was raised in a wealthy family, a wealthy merchant family, but there's a lot of bigotry against Dries in the world. And so he was raised with privilege in one sense, in that he was raised with money and had a good upbringing. But in another sense, he also was subjected to a lot of prejudice in his upbringing. And so he has a very sort of complex psyche about all of that. And I wanted to look in at all of them. I wanted all of them to have some kind of complication. Neria was kidnapped as a child and raised as a pirate, and then switched to join the Navy. What was her life like? What kind of, hang-ups has she got left over from that? What are her priorities? What does she care about? Glorbad, my soldier, massively duty, massively important to him. He's follows orders. He's very loyal to his king. But why is that? And I explore that in the story and get into a lot of that. And some of it, I actually sat down and literally wrote like a page of A4 for all of the characters when I was about maybe 20,000 words into the first book, because I felt like I really needed something solid that I had written down and I knew clearly what they were doing. But then a lot of it just comes in the writing. A lot of it comes in, oh, this would be interesting, or how would this affect her? This is going to change this person. This is going to change this person's character. Which, of course, the character arc is a major and important part of any story, really. But that's the thing for me, is just sort of thinking about how their life experience would have affected them. A lot of what I do to drive the story is figure out what they're motivated to do next. So anytime I get stuck, I sit down and I think about like where they're all at and what are they motivated to do? What is the most important thing for them to do next? And that often drives the story. So it's all intertwined. The world building, the story, the character development, I think, is all tied up together.
And you all have a lot of characters in your groups. So how do you balance giving all of the characters screen time, or page time, I guess, in this case, and making them distinct enough for the readers to keep track of? Tara, let's go with you first.
I think with making them distinct, it really comes down to how I envision them in my mind and making sure that they're just like as excuse me, as distinct as they can be, which a lot of times comes down to their voice and how they sound on the page and therefore how they sound to the reader. My quick key to switching between POVs is that I usually will have a little like gif or something of my character playing in my head to like quickly get into their mind frame. So like with Angelica, who's much more like a grumpy character, she's like has her arms crossed like this, or like if I'm switching back to Tasia, she's like, "Hey, what's up?" And kind of like the more jokester character. So it's just like a very quick way for me to like switch brain to be like, okay, I was just grumpy and a bitch now, so now I'm going to be a jokester over here. um and then making sure that they have enough time is really just kind of corresponds to what their character arcs are. um Making sure that their arcs, like for my four main characters specifically, making sure their arcs kind of are about the same length or have the same amount of beats. And then just making sure that on the page it makes it feel like they have the same amount of time. And that was something that um I really tried to pin down with book one. With book two, it was a little bit different because one of my characters is possessed. So he doesn't really, unfortunately, get the same amount of time as everyone else in book two. But in book three, I kind of make up for that. So each book, even though there are multiple main characters, certain characters, depending on what the book is and what the overall book's arc is, will have a little bit more time than others. But I think that's just the nature of having multi POV.
And Alex, why don't we go to you next?
So I try and, first of all, let me echo what Tara said completely, especially regarding voice. When I'm writing a scene, I automatically know that something has gone wrong. The very first red flag I see is when there's a line of dialogue that could have been said by 2 or 3 of the characters in the scene. Right? That's when I'm like, oh no, they don't know what they're talking about, and they're just stating my motivations. you know? And so I try to make sure that every character's dialogue is filtered through, their personality and their mood. And I think that that's really important. Also, for fans of Mass Effect, I will say that I just outright designate 2 or 3 characters per book, and I'm like, you guys get loyalty missions this book. Like, and I choose those based on like, oh, this is the overall plot arc that I want to do. I know what the loyalty missions would be sort of for the crew. I've already worked up like a little dossier on everybody. I love to do character discovery on the characters. And then I'll go like, oh, I think that this would dovetail nicely thematically with what they're doing, or this would cause the two characters to reflect off of one another in a really interesting way. Maybe my main character wants to make an ethical choice that another character has already faced and made a different choice, that kind of stuff. I love to go after that. And so for me, it's all about establishing big, dramatic, iconic moments for each character over the series. The main characters, I'm like, you got to get 2 to 3 iconic moments per book. But the side characters, I'm like, you got to get 1 iconic moment per series. That's for me.
Leslye, what is your strategy for making your characters distinct?
I think echoing what Tara and Alex said is I use a lot of spreadsheets, and so I chart out literally all of their goals and their motivations, their backstories, sort of their inner journey, and whether or not they are a POV character. Like in my books where I do have multiple POV characters, I definitely do that, but I don't worry too much about one character having more screen time than another one. Usually it's set up so that someone has a little bit more than other people, and the balance just kind of shifts naturally. But like, for example, in Monsters We Defy, when it's basically a single POV, I still want the other characters to feel alive, because that's part of like the beauty of the heist is just their interaction and all of that. But it's still going to be all 5 people just couldn't get equal screen time. So I kind of play favorites, and then it's like in the moment. I love what Alex said about having like this kind of signature moment. Even if it's a character who has a lot less time on the page, if the time that they have is used really well, so that it connects with the reader and just makes you love them in a chapter or two chapters where you focus on them. That's what I'm looking for, that kind of emotional connection with a character so that they can go off the page and still be in the reader's mind, hopefully. So yeah, that's just everybody doesn't always have the same amount of time, but hopefully they're in the reader's hearts still.
And Justin, what do you think?
It's really easy to have a massive scene full of people and completely forget about somebody and realize that you've just had somebody standing in the corner like a plum doing nothing and gone, oh, why are they even here? Oops, I should do something about that. It's a really common mistake to make. It's when you have a big cast. I think I have 6 main points of view as well as a few side points of view, 7 main characters. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm a madman for trying to juggle all of that, frankly. But voice, as all the guys have said, voice is really, really important. I once had a script looked over by a few producers in BBC Scotland here, and when it was ultimately rejected, the main thing they said was the characters all sound the same. It's basically a rookie mistake that most rookie writers make. And it is one of the easiest things to fix because even if you just have to base each character's voice on somebody or a combination of people as a starting point. It doesn't have to be them, but it's useful to think about people that and how they speak and the kind of things they would say. And I like to use things like idioms, for example. People, if they're thinking in terms of an idiom, give them an idiom that's relevant to their background and their life. So again, I'll use Nuria as an example. When she thinks of idioms, she uses naval idioms. So she'll say something like, a plan is hauled below the waterline or something like that, because that's what's relevant to her life. Whereas Alandria, who's grown up in forests and loves living in nature, her idioms are relevant to forest life. So things like that just give people a different, a sort of identity and a uniqueness that can help pick them apart and keep them separate in people's minds.
And as the chat is getting off-railed by in-jokes, speaking of which, are there any fun in-jokes or rituals that your characters share with each other that enhances their relationship for the readers? Anybody wants to jump in first?
Nuria and Glorbad drink a lot together. And that is very much they drink to deal with their post-traumatic stress disorder, basically. But Aranok and Alandria have a lot of banter between them. I don't know if they have particular in-jokes, but their relationship is ostensibly a secret from most people. So they are kind of secretly bantering about that kind of stuff. And it's the kind of thing that it's a useful thing to have, like specific things between two characters. Again, it can help just if there's a specific relationship there and they have a specific thing that's only between the two of them, it makes both of them unique as well. It can be a really, again, another useful way of just making them individuals.
Tara, your characters have known each other for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But you think?
Yeah, I can't think of like specific like in-book jokes that they have, but they definitely have like unique relationships with each other. And one of my favorites is actually between Tasia and Angelica, because they don't like each other. But it's like antagonistic, but in like a fun way. So like I think in one of it's been so long that I can't remember if it's actually in the book or if it was in an earlier draft, but there was a scene where Tasia came to Angelica's villa and Angelica like sweeps down the stairs and she's like, I thought I told them to take the trash out today or something like that. And just having like these fun little, like they're comfortable enough with each other to be that level of antagonistic. And so I really like working with their dynamics specifically. But then you have Tasia and Risha, who are much more like friends. And so like Risha would see Tasia compete in like duels just because she could and be like the mom friend fretting on the background being like, please don't get hurt. Or like Tasia would like, as children would like run up to her and be like, "Can you bring this rat back from the dead?" What about this dead bird I found? And so just kind of playing with those childhood to adult relationships was really fun.
And Alex says, do your characters have any fun in-jokes or rituals?
Yeah, plenty of them do. I actually think that what you're speaking to is almost, do any of them have particular bonds that transcend the circumstance? You know, so like Boots and Kennard are constantly talking in very open terms because Boots bought this AI to be her therapy cube, right? And so she's constantly revealing things about herself and her thoughts that she wouldn't say to other people, which can be really fun when you have a real closed off, super grumpy character who won't talk to the other characters about her feelings. You know, as far as in jokes and stuff like that are concerned, Nyla and Orna, who you know, are romantic interests as the series progresses. So if you like a good romance there, that's good. But they're both engineers, and they have a real tendency to, whenever it's time to start a new fun project, they both similarly get swept away. They both make terrible messes. They both, you know, they can't help but encourage each other, and also in some of the worst possible ways, because they're you know, science types.
And Leslye, do your characters have any fun in jokes or develop any fun in jokes or rituals?
They don't really. I mean, some characters have more of a rapport with each other. So like Clara and Zelda have been roommates for a while, and Clara sort of being the grumpy, character puts up with Zelda's antics, and Zelda ignores Clara's grumpiness. And then we have Mama Octavia, who is Clara's grandmother, who's a spirit that only Clara can see and talk to. And so because she's known, her grandmother's known her whole life, she is able to have this rapport and just get on her case and do like grandmotherly things. And so those kinds of things happen. I think over the course of the novel, like the characters who grow to meet each other, there's some banter that happens, especially as they clash and as they disagree. So you would think by the end of it, they now have developed some of these things. And then the other two characters, Israel and Jessie Lee, are cousins, and they, they both come onto the heist crew together. But you don't see a lot of their banter necessarily. Like, there's a little bit of it that indicates that, okay, these people have a history and, sort of rapport as character development. So you can see just like the little evidences of, okay, they go back a long time and they've been through some things together. That's more of what's in the book.
And now for a very important question. What is your advice for writers who want to write a novel that centers around a group of characters rather than a single protagonist? Does anybody want to start?
I'm gonna say that sounds difficult.
I was gonna say, don't.
I mean, I'm not. We as readers oftentimes want somebody to attach to. Now, what I will say is that, maybe you could do the Song of Ice and Fire roving lens, where we bracketed together, this is the group of characters that this book is about. But it's still about some specific characters per book, right? Now, again, we can swap them out at any point, but that's one way to handle it, because you still have to put your attention somewhere. But and of course, the more equivalent time you give, the more inflated your plot is going to have to be to take over that, right? Like, your main character has one pretty easy journey straight through. You can kind of tell it in about 100,000 words to 200,000 words if you're doing fantasy and you want to get wild, but generally speaking, that's fine. What I found is every time I'm like, oh, every single character gets complete closure in this. First of all, there's not as much to write about in the next book. Second of all, it's so inflated. It is so ridiculously inflated, and you end up sort of distracting from the main idea plot that you wanted. Now, I don't ever want to discourage anybody from doing a literary experiment. So I'm going to caveat all of that with, if you feel like you understand how to do this, you go for it, because it's something I couldn't do.
Yeah, kind of jumping off of that, I feel like my advice comes twofold, and one of which is if you want to write a big cast of characters with like one central main protagonist, just make sure that your protagonist is affecting everybody else in the group, so that all of like their little quests all come back to the protagonist, and that's a good way to kind of not make it so inflated, because otherwise you can just keep going on and on with these different like side quests that these other characters have. And then if you kind of do something more of what I did with the City of Dusk, where you have kind of multiple main characters who kind of flit in and out, just try to intersect their arcs as much as possible, because again, that will reduce your word count a bit and reduce some of the subplots that could really like pad out the book. And so intersecting them as much as possible just kind of helps to mainstream it.
Yeah, I would say that it's sort of, you have this sort of spine, and if you really do have multiple main characters, then there's some sort of external plot that even if they have different motivations, if they're on like different parallel journeys, that it always connects. And that connection is really important for the reader so that they understand, even if these characters don't meet for a long time, maybe they don't meet in this book, maybe it's a future book, or they do, but you understand as a reader that you're going towards something and there is a connection that's happening, and you're keeping that sort of the interest built while each of the separate characters is focusing on like a personal stakes. So I think you could do either like one character stakes and everyone feeds in, or some sort of external plot and each character has their own unique personal stakes, but it's still in service to that's the plot and that spine of that story.
And Justin, do you have any advice?
Yeah, I think so. I actually came to this process as a way of beating writer's block, but I also find it as a good way of keeping track of all the different characters and making sure that they each have interesting individual storylines going on, and that you know what they are and that they're acting true to themselves. So what I do is I sit down every now and again, and I take a piece of A4 and I write down all my main characters, and I write down essentially where they are in the book and in the world itself physically, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and then the important thing is what are they motivated to do next. And understanding all of those things for each character as you move through the story should make sure that all of the characters feel real and are involved in the story, and that you don't forget about anybody and suddenly realize, oh, I haven't mentioned that character for 8 chapters. I should probably figure out what they're doing. So yeah, check in with them all. Make sure they've all got their own story. Make sure that their perspective on what's happening, that you understand that you know what their perspective is, and that they are acting true to that. So, if you've got a character who would be mortally offended by something that one of the other characters does, you have to make sure they act on that, or you have to explain why they didn't. Because if you miss out on that, then what you've got is more of a kind of stick figure over here instead of a rounded character. So yeah, work out what their motivations are, work out what their perspective is, and make sure you keep on top of it.
One of my favorite tropes in SFF books is ensemble groups of characters. So thank you very much to all these authors for doing a difficult thing, because I do love all these authors' books. We're going to jump into so much about character. Audience questions. The first question, some of these audience questions we've covered in the discussion, but the first one I'm going to ask is, how do you handle tracking characters within ensemble scenes to make sure everyone is contributing and in character? Justin, I think you mentioned this about forgetting that a character is in the background in the discussion. Yep. So why don't you answer?
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy to do. You get into the scene and you're thinking about who's going to respond to this, what's naturally happening here, and then you realize you've had somebody standing in the corner saying nothing for the whole scene. What can sometimes be useful with that is, I suppose, when I come into a scene like that, one of the first things I think about is who's the most useful point of view to write this scene from. And that's usually based on what information you want that person to have. You maybe want information another character has not to be revealed necessarily in that scene, so you don't want them to be your point of view character because it's important that that's kept secret at that point. So think about who's going to be your point of view character, and if you've got a character who's not contributing to the conversation or anything, maybe have your point of view character notice them and be like, well, what are they doing? What's happening over there? Just try to make sure that you pick the right point of view, because that can often be the one that the thing that will help you to keep track of all of it, basically. But yeah, it's really easy to do. My answer is, I guess, I actually literally keep a spreadsheet. I have a spreadsheet which tracks where every character is at any given time, and so I can just look at it and see if they're in the same place. Like, oh, they should be in this. They should be involved in this. And it's the only way I can keep track of where people physically are, especially with the number of characters I'm trying to keep track of. But yeah, spreadsheet works.
Leslye, I think you mentioned having a spreadsheet too. Is that
I have
your
lots of
suggestion?
spreadsheets. Yeah, I love spreadsheets. But I mean, I think in terms of this too, I do try to track, who's in what scene and do they need to be there. It's really like if you're having an issue with a character not contributing, maybe they just don't need to be there at all. Like, why are they in this scene? Could they be off somewhere else, or just, they went to the bathroom or something? So try to only include the people who are relevant. And if they're there and they're not doing anything, then maybe in the next scene is their POV and they're reacting to it, or they had some other reason. So don't try to squeeze everything into every scene. Really feel like or focus on the important things and the things that are going to build character and progress your plot the most.
Tara and Alex, you don't have to answer if you don't have anything to add, but if you do, go ahead.
I just want to say I cannot stress enough how much I agree with what Leslye just said. Your characters are not all required to be there just because they're the band of, champions or whatever. Like, I love that for them, but they can hang out individually more. And you'd be amazed at how many good two-character scenes exist in an ensemble. The place where I always come up against this every single time is in a briefing. Because if you're going to have a space battle, you should probably talk about what you're going to do first. But first of all, how many briefings do you need to put in your book? If you have more than 2, you really need to ask yourself some hard questions. Second of all, when you do that, every character is going to come in there with a motivation. Are they going to act according to that motivation? If not, maybe you do sideline them, but do what you can to get them out of the camera. If they're not going to do anything, don't be like, and then they all looked at Bill. And he said a line because we were legally obligated to do that as he's the part of the band of champions. We don't want that situation. And again, I cannot stress enough that anybody who says a line of dialogue, you should be able to identify who said it based on the context and the drivers.
Yeah, I have a lot of big ensemble scenes in book 3 of the Dark God series, just a lot. So it really does matter who is talking and who doesn't have to talk. I had one scene recently where it was a briefing scene where these 2 other antagonistic characters were talking to the group en masse. And I was like, not all of you have to talk. So I just have this one character who's literally just eating peanuts and then just stops eating peanuts when someone says something, and that's all they contribute to this scene. Very important things are being discussed and she's just that's literally all your character has to do at the moment.
It is the best, actually.
It's a solid plan. It's a solid plan. Let's have somebody in the background with popcorn.
Okay, for this next question, do you have any special tips for writing a character that is not your gender? Alex, why don't we start with you on this one?
Any special tips for writing a character that is not your gender? Well, I would recommend, first of all, that you know and speak to a lot of people who are not necessarily like you. Trying to have a better understanding of the things that are in their lives will help you understand the things that are in your characters' lives. Also, don't just go on your assumptions here. If you have some thoughts about how things might be on the other side, maybe make sure that somebody from that gender reads it, especially if we're going to talk about any kind of romantic interludes, for the love of God. You know, don't put your don't just like cram your personality onto somebody else either. Like that's another common one. I see a lot of guys being like, I'm writing this very strong female character. I'm like, I think you're writing a man. um I think and I'm wondering if maybe maybe you're showing a bit of, tone deafness. I don't know. And so yeah, that would be, if I was going to give you tips for writing other genders, or just really other experiences, it would be become a person who reads widely and converses widely and openly and wants to be vulnerable and talk to people and be, another human who shares stories. And pay a sensitivity reader. If you're going to hire a sensitivity reader, don't be like, hey, you're one of my marginalized friends. Pay that person.
Does anyone want to add to that?
Just that, like, there are multiple ways of being somebody. So, like, I remember back when I was like writing my first novels when I was like a teenager, somebody had, like, I guess one of my friends or something had like read part of it and was like, your main character, who was a man, cries too much. And I was like, huh, what an interesting thing to say. And so, but I feel like that was just foreshadowing because I write very sad men. So I love writing like the wet spaghetti noodle string of a man. Like, it's my favorite type of man to write. So there are multiple ways to write different types of people. Read widely, talk to multiple people, listen to lectures, follow people on Twitter you normally wouldn't follow. Like, yeah, basically everything that Alex just said.
Leslye, Justin, do you have anything to add?
I would just, what they said was perfect. I just think that, do everything with empathy. I mean, this question, yeah, it could be anyone who's not like you, or anyone who is like you who is not you. I mean, everyone, it could be the same gender, same race, same age, but everyone has different experiences. So you're writing fictional characters and you're trying to give them some sort of like verisimilitude, right? So thinking through things, but like all of the above was very accurate as well. Just remember that there's empathy in the world and you're trying to see things through their eyes, through their experience. And our job as writers is to imagine that and, not bring our biases in, but just imagine a range of people and then try to show multiple people who share that identity also. So you can show a range of humanity, sort of like what Tara was saying.
I have nothing particularly unique to add to anything that has been said because that's all great advice. The only thing I was going to very flippantly say was look up men writing women on Twitter.
No.
And obviously don't do that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's what I said. Don't do that. Do the opposite of that. Yes.
I have a test that's actually very helpful for this kind of stuff, and I think would have gotten a lot of authors out of some hot water if they'd have just applied it ahead of time. Which is, the test is, if you're going to write something about a specific type of person, let's say you want to write about women, and you're going to show up to a reading. Imagine that only women show up to that reading. How excited are you to walk in there and read your 20-30 minutes to them? Are you very excited, or are you scared? If you're scared, probably reconsider what you wrote.
So this is a fun question. How many POVs is too many? And is it better to give each member of the ensemble POV chapters or stick with only one? Leslye, I think let's go with you first.
Yeah, I've heard this question a lot, and there's not a real answer. I mean, it's kind of this skill. Like, handling a lot of POVs is very difficult. So George R.R. Martin can do 20 or 30 or however many POVs there are in any one of his books. Most of us cannot do that. The most I've tried was 7, and that was in book 4 of the series when we knew all of these people already. So I know Justin did 7 right off the break, just like, yeah, go for it. It's hard, just keep in mind that it's hard. So I don't think there's a number that's too many, but if you find yourself juggling and struggling and it's not coming together, then that's probably a good key that, you did too much. If you're a newer writer, especially, start with 1 or 2 and then maybe work your way up. I think I started with 2, and then every book I added another 1 or 2, and because I felt more comfortable doing it, I felt like I had a handle on how it worked. Do what you want, but I wouldn't recommend starting off the break with like a dozen POVs. But no one can really tell you how many is too many. It's sort of like, if you can't pull it off, it's too many.
I started my first draft of The City of Dusk with 8, and it eventually got pared down to 7. So I did start off the bat with about 7 or 8 of them. But one of them got paired off only because it was a sibling. And so the majority of her contributions could be through her sister's POV. So that one just ended up getting a little bit axed. Yeah, I would say there is no limit. Like the limit does not exist. But it really just depends on like what you're trying to accomplish in the book and what your characters are trying to accomplish. Because if you have too many right off the bat, it can get really bogged down. Your readers probably won't have enough time to get invested in these characters. So it's really a struggle to pick like which POVs are going to be prominent and which are only going to happen like maybe sometimes, like if you want to have a villain's POV, which I personally love, and it only happens like once in a while. Like I love that kind of stuff. And if you're smart about what like information you're bringing to that very limited POV, then the readers will have enough to be like, ooh, that was really interesting. I can't wait to see them again further down the road or like in the next book or something like that. So yeah, the limit does not exist, but just have know what you're trying to accomplish.
I just want to call some attention to there are no rules, only difficulty levels in the chat. I thought that was a really great quote until I realized it came from a Shackleton, which I gotta say, historically, Shackletons haven't done so well with that, right? Losing expeditions and whatnot. But no, it's absolutely 100% true. For me, with all my orbit stuff, it's been 2 POVs because that's how I wanted to do it. And it's just sort of, but for one of my alien stories where I was going to, for example, kill a lot of the characters, it made more sense to have a lot of POVs. But even in that, the way that I did it was I striped the book so that every POV appears for at least 1/3 of the book, even though there are 6 of them. That at least kept it from being too terribly confusing.
And Justin, do you
I
feel?
think the importance about point of view, slightly doubling back to what I said earlier, is that choosing a point of view is about choosing which point of view will best serve your story and what part of the story you're trying to tell at that point, what you want to reveal, what you want to flesh out, what you don't want to reveal. And so I wouldn't go in thinking I'm going to write this story with 6 points of view. Go in thinking I've got these characters, and then as you're writing it, think about whose point of view is going to best serve the way you're telling the story, because that's more important, I think. The latter should inform the former rather than the other way around.
I think we have about 5 minutes, so this may be our last question, but I think it's a good one and an important one that I think people would like to hear about. What strategies do you use to help the reader care about or connect with all your characters, as many as there are? Alex, you want to start?
Well, I've already mentioned the loyalty missions. I love the loyalty missions. It's always really nice to have your characters, your side characters, come up against something that breaks their identity to some extent, where they are not equal to the challenge. It is deeper than them. It is more philosophically beyond them, whatever. Something that causes them to be really screwed. And to give your main character or your POV character a chance to have a heart to heart with them. Oh, I love a heart to heart when somebody's like being super vulnerable and it's like deserved. Because I will say, I like some people have been guilty of jumping on the heart to heart a little too early. But it's really that particular tactic is one of my absolute favorites because it can happen in any circumstance. I also like to have characters sharing a meal. That's another sort of favorite pastime of mine because then I get to write about food, which I love more than just about anything.
Good strategy. Oh, go ahead.
Food for sure is a good one. Absolutely. I think a lot of the times it's their relationships with other characters because you will see how they treat other people, and I think that can be either very endearing or very off-putting depending on the situation. Um, one of my favorite characters to write in the Dark Gods is Angelica, who is I say this very affectionately, my bitch. She is just like, she loves power, she's very cunning, she doesn't like playing well with others. And it's really funny seeing like 50% of readers being like, I don't like Angelica, and the other 50% being like, I love Angelica. So it's like, it really depends on like what the reader's looking for. And I think a lot of the times it's like, either it's a character that's like a power fantasy for them, or it's something where like, I would love to hang out with this character. They don't necessarily have to be like in the same category, because there are characters that I love who would absolutely kill me if I met them. But it doesn't stop me from not loving them. So I think a lot of it is what the reader is, I guess, like in the mood for, or like some sort of power fantasy, or they're looking for some sort of like fictional character to kind of relate to. So something in that ballpark.
And Leslye or Justin?
I think that like relatable stakes or motivations and personal stakes help readers connect with characters too. Like if you know what they want, why they're doing what they're doing. I mean, I agree with Tara that seeing how they treat other people is also a really great way. But when you, especially if they're a POV character and you're in their head and you know what they want and what's driving them, that's a really like clear kind of shortcut into the reader's heart, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Dig into their motivations, dig into their emotions, and then let your reader see them as well. Exactly that. Let them see how they react to things happening. Let them see what they care about. Let them be upset by something that somebody else is upset by. Show them empathizing with each other. If you understand what's going on in their head and what's going on with them emotionally, then you can do a better job of conveying that as well for the reader too. So make sure that you dig into it yourself and then feed it in. And it doesn't have to be overt. It can be subtle as well. But yeah, if you understand it and you are attached to what they're going through, then it's easier for you to portray that for the reader, I think.
Oh, wonderful advice. I think we're right at the hour. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to the authors for the wonderful discussion about a great topic. And as a reminder, you can watch a replay of this video just a few minutes after it ends. You can go to the same link and you can the replay will be there. There's also a link at the bottom that will go to another page of links to pages to sign up for more sessions or to see the replays of the previous sessions, and also links to buy all these authors' books if you haven't read them and you are so inclined to do so after watching them talk about their expertise. Thank you so much again to everyone for joining us. Thank you to the authors, and have a good rest of your day or night.
Yay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.